Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Elijah with Fire Creek Forge. Today we are going to sharpen knives. I'm going to teach you how to sharpen a knife. Keep a razor sharp so that when you need it, it is there and ready to use. A dull knife is no fun whatsoever, and it is more dangerous because it takes more effort to try to cut things and push it through whatever you're cutting. So let's say that you purchased a high-end custom knife, or maybe you just have a, popular manufactured blade like this one. All of these things that we're going to teach today are going to be applicable to that. So a couple of things up front. First of all, there are a lot of different sharpening tools on the market today that are powered, that have different belts or grits or spinning, turning things, and all of those things can be useful. I don't like to use them for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's easy to take off too much material. It can be easy to overheat the edge of your blade. And none of those things are good for knife performance or longevity, and you certainly don't want to ruin a knife, especially one that you've paid a lot of money for. Secondly, I appreciate the skill and the tradition involved with hand sharpening a blade. So basically, for as long as history can remember, the way you make something sharp is to scrub it on something harder. So we're literally, scraping a piece of steel against a stone. That's a really simplistic way of looking at it. There's a little more to it than that. But that's basically what we've been doing for thousands of years, and we're going to continue that tradition. I'm not reinventing the wheel here, as I just sort of alluded to. There's a lot of people out there that teach sharpening, and I have learned from a lot of different people. So I'm pulling together the techniques that I use on a regular basis. Every knife that I make and sell, almost every single one, I hand sharpen and hone and strop to a razor sharp edge before I wrap it up and send it out the door. And so I'm pulling from, traditional, the way Grandpa did it, a little bit of, Japanese techniques on water stones, a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And I'm going to show you how I sharpen knives and the things that have worked well for me. To keep your knives shaving sharp and ready to use, you really don't need a lot of equipment. In fact, what you're looking at right here is what I have used on dozens and dozens of knives as I build them, sharpen them, and send them out the door. Pretty basic equipment. A couple of sharpening stones, a piece of leather with some polished compound for a strop. Now I'm going to be using a little bit more sophisticated equipment. In part of the video today, I just invested in this Norton 3-stone sharpening system, and I've got a little nicer strop here to use. But the concepts are going to be the same. Hopefully this will allow me to show you what I'm doing a little more easily so that you can apply it to whatever body of equipment that you end up using. First of all, we've got a combination India stone, and this is a Norton as well. We've got a fine grit. I don't know the exact grit, but you can find these in different grits. This is a coarse and this is a fine. And typically I use this side a lot more than this side. Secondly, I've got an Arkansas stone here. This is not the hardest Arkansas stone you can get. It's a little bit of a softer one, but it's still a finer grit compared to this. And then finally, as I mentioned, I have a piece of leather for stropping the edge. Now I'm going to show you how to use all of these to the greatest effectiveness possible to get a really good edge. A couple of things that we need to talk about before we actually put steel to stone. Firstly, what is the knife for that you're sharpening? For example, I have a small kitchen utility knife, and that compared to even a small pocket knife like this, or a more outdoors blade like this, all of those have a different thickness to the edge and a little bit different angle for maximum performance. And it's important to note that you want to sharpen a knife for what it's for. The first important thing you need to be aware of and make sure that you take care of before trying to sharpen anything is having a secure setup or base for your sharpening stone. Now these particular ones, they sometimes come with a wood sort of base to them, but however you do it, you need to have something that it can sit on a table, a nice flat stable surface without sliding around or rocking back and forth or any of that. This is going to be crucial because you don't want to have to try to worry about keeping that stone stable. There's other things you need to be worrying about when sharpening a blade, and it's just very frustrating and not efficient. All right, so we're just going to jump right into it. We're going to start with the worst case scenario, and that would be something like this, these chips in the edge. This knife was not being used for what it's designed, but I knew that. Or you can look at the edge here, which you can on this knife a little bit, and you can see some glaring bright spots. And that means that there's no edge there because it's reflecting light. That's a flat spot. So basically we've got a knife that's in pretty bad condition, and we really need to address that edge, take some material off, and bring it down closer to where we need it. So I'm going to start with the coarsest grit stone that I have on this system. In this case, it would be this side of the stone here. We'll start with this here. I'm going to lay the edge on the stone at my desired angle here. Now, I tend to sharpen knives with a sort of a sharper angle, or maybe a more shallow angle, depending on how you look at it, for a finer edge. And that is right about 20 degrees, 15 to 20 degrees. All right, so once I've established my edge, and there's different ways you can do that. You can take, you know, 2 popsicle sticks, lay them on there. That's 2 right there. That's about what I want on this particular knife. Really, this is going to come down to you feeling it out, and you can try different angles. You can come up a little bit more to give yourself more of an obtuse edge, and that's going to be a stronger edge, but it's not going to cut quite as well. You can go way down here, and that's a little bit too thin, and it's going to take more time to take all that material off of the bevel. So somewhere in between. And what you're going to do is simply scrape the knife back and forth on the stone. It's really as simple as that. Okay, sort of. While you're doing that, you need to maintain that angle. And this is really probably going to be the most difficult thing to learn in the beginning when it comes to sharpening your knife, but this is important. Also, you have to repeat that on both sides. Now, this might sound hard and more difficulty than it's worth, but trust me, once you get into it and get into a flow, it's not as hard as it sounds. Now, most people, when they start out doing this, prefer to hold the knife in their right hand if they're right-handed, and then steady the blade. This is how I do it, with your other hand, with a couple or several fingers, and then push the blade forward in one stroke, and then repeat that on the other side of the blade, the full length of the stone. That's kind of important because you want this to wear evenly over the life of the stone as much as possible. Now, if you're first starting out, this is probably the best way to do that. Simply give yourself 1 stroke, 2 strokes, 1 stroke, 2 stroke on the stone, back and forth, maintaining that angle. That's what you want to be paying attention to. And that's again why it's so important to have a stable surface, a stable stone, so that you're not worried about the stone rocking or sliding or anything like that. So you can focus on keeping that angle consistent all the way along, back and forth. All right, so that is how you probably want to do it if you're just starting out. As you get a little more confident doing this, I recommend getting a little more aggressive and actually addressing that edge with multiple back and forth strokes on the stone. Okay, so I'm working the full length of the stone here. As I'm going back and forth, I am slightly rocking this knife to match the slight curve of the blade because I need to be able to contact the entire edge here. Now, on the single stroke here, I'm doing that by following through as I complete that movement, okay? Because you need to be able to grind or abrade the entire length of the edge. So you can see I'm addressing that all the way up and down several times as I'm going back and forth on this edge here. So I've still got quite a significant chip. I really need to focus more on just the tip here. And so I can do that without actually rocking that back and forth to connect to the entire edge here. So let's do that. Get my rag here. Okay, so you can see we have taken out the chips almost completely. We're getting close to being done with that. Now you'll notice this is my primary bevel here, and that's a pretty big primary bevel. The reason it's so big on this knife is because this knife was not ground thin enough for my liking, and so I've thinned out the edge, and that's something to keep in mind as we move forward. So now that I've got those chips out, I'm going to go ahead and go back and address the entire edge again until I get a little more uniformity on the whole edge here. I want to see that primary bevel, if you can see that in the light hopefully, I want that the same width all the way up to the point there. That should put my edge and the point in the center of the blade, as you can see right here, hopefully on the camera. It's not quite in the center yet, so I need to address that a little bit more. Now everything I'm doing here can be done, again, like I said, with a single stroke, like so. It's just going to take longer, but as you gain confidence, you can get a little bit more aggressive on that and get those multiple abrasions in there. And it's going to just be a lot faster for you. It's going to have the same result. But once I get to where I have this pretty even and close to where I want it, I will go ahead and then come back and just do some nice even strokes like this instead of the multiple movements here. And let's just kind of make sure that everything is even and as far as this grit can allow, as smooth as possible, okay? So I'm going to look at the edge here in the light, and I don't see any shiny spots, and I can feel the edge here. And if you're careful, you can sort of ascertain how sharp the blade is. Now, it does not feel very sharp at all right now. Something I grew up doing is using the old fingernail test. If it catches your fingernail, then that indicates how sharp it is. So that can be helpful as well. If you sharpen a bunch of knives and you end up with a worn spot in your fingernail. So at this point, we have sharpened this knife as sharp as it's going to get on this particular grit. Now, something that a lot of people teach and talk about is the burr. And quite frankly, I don't really pay as much attention to the burr as a lot of people do. What I'm really paying attention to is how sharp this knife is actually getting. And yes, you're going to end up with some amount of burr on the edge of the blade. And what that indicates is that you have gone as far as you can sharpening the edge on this particular grit. And yes, so if you drag the knife backwards or your finger away from the edge, you can feel a very slight overhang of material on that edge, and that's your burr. But what I'm also looking at is, at some point, the knife is not getting any sharper, and it can't. This is as sharp as this grit can get this blade, okay? And it's a lot sharper than it was, but it's still nowhere near where we want it. So I don't think I can really do a close-up for you, but if you look at the primary bevel here in the light and rotate it back and forth like this, you can see the burr at the very edge once you get it in the correct light. And you can feel it. It's a very slight drag on your finger right at the edge there. All right, so we've done as much as we can do on this grit. It's time to move forward and go up to the next grit level. Hit it with the grit there, and that's just a lot quicker overall. But I'm not going to spend as much time on this stone as I did the previous one because I don't have to. Making sure that I contact the entire edge as I go back and forth. And again, when I get to a point where I'm getting close to what this grit can do for me here, we'll just make sure that everything is nice and smooth and clean as possible. So get some nice, even, measured, controlled passes here before I check it and see if we're ready to move on. Okay. So you can already see that the abrasive marks on this primary bevel are finer, as they should be. And for the most part, you shouldn't see your previous grit marks left on there. especially not right down towards the edge. So I can check it with my thumbnail. I can feel it, kind of feel how sharp it is. You don't want to push your fingers on there. You just want to feel it, and you can run them back and forth ever so gently and feel how the edge of the knife wants to grab the skin. Okay, it's feeling a little bit sharper, but it's as sharp as it can really get on this particular grit. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward to my fine stone, and this is an Arkansas stone similar to this one. You can get even finer Arkansas stones, but this should get us to a pretty decent edge here. And for a lot of people, this will be an adequate working edge. So at this point, I'm kind of sticking with the even measured passes here. Make sure that my angle is consistent. And I can feel that it's sharper, it catches the thumbnail better, and things are progressing nicely. Okay, so as I continue forward here, I'm getting to where I feel like it might be capable of shaving hair. And I have not even attempted that to this point because I know it wouldn't. So a lot of this is something that you're going to really just get more comfortable and knowledgeable with as you do it. You're just going to start understanding and feeling when a knife is sharp, when it should be sharp, what you can expect, and how it progresses through the sharpening process. Okay, it's not as sharp as it's going to be by any stretch, but I wonder if we can get some hair off, and we can. Okay, very nice. Now, at this point, if I finish this out on this Arkansas stone here, which is not as fine as this one, and not as fine as like the hard dark stones that you can get, the super hard. Those will give you a really fine hone, to my understanding. I haven't used one of those yet. I'd like to get one of those someday. But this fine stone right here, for a lot of people, this will provide an adequate working edge, and it is sharp, and it will cut. I think it'll even cut paper nicely. So it'll cut paper pretty decent. Yeah, it's pretty sharp, and we could leave it right there, and we could use this knife and be happy with that. And then as it gets a little bit dull, we could just come back and touch it up a little bit. Probably don't need to go even to the medium stone for a while, and certainly not the coarse stone for quite a while, until we get to the point where we need to thin down our primary bevel again. And that'll be good for a lot of situations. But there's another level that we can take this to. So the question might be, if you've got a great working edge that slices paper this easily and even takes hair off, why do you need to go any further with the sharpening process? And the answer might be that you don't. It depends on what the knife is for. There's a lot of people in the food prep industry or world that like to leave their edges at, say, the 1000 grit, or maybe a little more, but somewhere below the stropping level. The reason for that is when you sharpen a knife on a stone and you don't go up to a super high grit, it tends to have a little more bite to the edge simply because of the micro teeth that you leave on the edge with that particular grit of stone. And the common example is when you're cutting a tomato, for example, that smooth skin that with the give in the fruit there, a little bit of bite to the edge, helps the knife to just cut right in. And so a lot of people like that in various different food prep applications. However, if you're using your knife primarily for carving or cutting or whittling wood in the various applications of bushcraft, survival, outdoors, whatever, having a stropped edge can be an advantage, because stropping that edge polishes it to a point where there's more of a mono edge on the microscopic level. That simply means that one piece of steel is stronger and holds up over time better than multiple smaller unsupported pieces of steel. And we're talking again at the microscopic level. This isn't anything that you're going to see with the naked eye, but that's just how the material works. And so you might be sacrificing a little bit of the bite, but for a smoother, cleaner, longer cutting blade, and that's particularly advantageous when working with wood. So the next step that you would do is to get a strop, which is nothing more than a piece of leather contact cemented to a sturdy piece of wood. And the thing that you need to use with this is some kind of polishing compound. And my preferred compound is this Mother's Brand Mag and aluminum polish, simply because it's so fine. I find that it provides an extremely nicely polished edge. There's different polish or buffing compounds out there. I like this. It's extremely fine, like I said, and provides a very great polish. So this is a brand new strop. I have been using this piece of leather on a tabletop for quite some time. Finally got this thing up and running here. So we're going to apply some paste to it for the first time and get some knives hair popping sharp. So it really doesn't take a lot of compound here. I've been using this one for a while and there's hardly anything gone. So I don't want a super thick layer. It just kind of smears around on there too much. So I'm going to try to wipe it on with my finger and keep that relatively thin. This particular compound is going to dry and leave basically a powder. But I'm going to try to work it into the surface of the leather a little bit. And this is the hair side of the leather, not the flesh side. It's flesh side down, although you can use that. It's just a little more coarse. Either one will work though. Okay, so we've got this worked in just a real thin layer. As you saw, it didn't take much at all. And the entire surface of the strop is coated. And I'm just going to let that dry a little bit before we start using it, so it doesn't just smear around on the leather. You're probably familiar with strops in the context of the old straight razors, and that is how they got them hair popping sharp or shaving sharp. And that's what we're going to do with our knife right here. So just the opposite of the way that I taught you how to use the stone, you're going to drag the edge, or excuse me, the blade away from the edge on this strop instead of towards it. So we see we've got some polish compound kind of gumming up on the blade. That's not a big deal. It'll smear back off. But what you see there is some darkening, and that is actually steel being polished off of the edge. And again, we want to make sure we contact the entire length of the edge, and so we have to kind of rotate that a little bit to catch the curvature of the blade. And we're just going to work this back. Again, angle is important. Okay, so for the angle on this strop, essentially I want the same angle that I had on the stone plus a little bit higher on the spine, so a little bit more of an obtuse angle. The reason for that is on a very minor level. When I press this blade against the leather and drag it backwards, what's happening is that leather is giving a little bit, and so it's actually coming up around the edge ever so slightly because it's pushing down, the blade is pushing down, and it's coming around the radius of that edge ever so slightly. And if we repeat that on both sides, we end up with a nice radiused edge on the microscopic level, which is the strongest, longest lasting edge that you can have, and also extremely sharp. It's that chisel-like smooth cutting edge that we want for especially like woodcraft and those types of applications. So I've got some polished compound coming off. I'm just going to wipe that off because that's not going to go back on the strop there, but you can see the amount of steel that has already been polished off. And that's normal. You just leave that. That's going to build up over time. Eventually, after several applications of polished compound, we're going to have to scrape that off with carefully scrape that off with like a nice edge of something, but that's not going to be for quite a while, so just don't even worry about that. All right, so at this point, we should be approaching a shaving or hair popping sharp edge on this blade. So I'm going to give it a few more passes here, and you can see that I'm a little more obtuse on that angle than I was on the stone, and that is because we're actually polishing that radius, like I said, around on the very edge of this knife here. So you should see that right up at the edge you've got a polish going, like a mirror polish essentially, and that doesn't have to, you don't want that to extend up very far because you're just trying to get the very edge. So I can tell that we've got a pretty keen edge here, and one thing you're going to notice if you use the fingernail trick is that it's going to slide this way pretty easily on your fingernail because we've polished out those micro teeth, but it does still catch going this way on the fingernail. So let's just check for hair popping sharpness here. You got to be careful, of course, but that takes it off without like any pressure to speak of, and it even wants to catch the skin a little bit. That's how sharp it is. So you've got to be careful, of course, but this is the ancient method of testing the sharpness there, if you can get the hair in there right. I was trying to just pop, what I was trying to do there is just pop off one hair. If you just gently press it against the hair and it pops off. As far as actually shaving, yeah, I can do that. I can just take all that hair off, no problem whatsoever. So there's shaving sharp, and then there's hair popping sharp. We might need to put a few more passes on that. There we go. See, I don't know if you can see that, but just press it against there, pops right off. And that's how you get that kind of an edge with your strop. Now, in daily use, you can actually come back to the strop and touch that up every so often without even having to touch it on the fine grit stone. It just depends on the type and amount of use. So there we go. We went from a chipped blade and pretty dull edge to a hair popping sharp knife. But let's move on to some other knives and see how those go. All right, well, that was kind of fun, wasn't it? We started with a really bad edge, some nasty chips in it and everything, and we got it down to a hair popping sharp blade. So that's pretty great. Now I can actually use this knife and not have to try to saw through packing tape or whatever it is that I'm currently working on. So now we have a useful knife. But let's go with scenario number 2. Let's say that you've got a knife that you've used for a while and there's no chips in the edge, you've taken care of it, and you've kept it sharp for the most part, but let's say it's just not performing quite as well as you would like. So in this particular example, I have just that, which is a kitchen knife that I built quite some time ago on the channel here actually. And it's sharp-ish, but what I'm starting to notice is that as I've sharpened it multiple times over the period of a couple of years or whatever, the edge itself is not as thin as it used to be, and it's not cutting as efficiently as I want it to. So we're gonna go ahead and address that and make this knife cut a lot better. All right, so while this knife does not have any nicks or chips on the edge or anything like that, the edge is not as thin as I want it to be or as it used to be, and therefore it's not cutting as well. And it's not as easy to sharpen either, because when you're working with a more obtuse edge, then you have to take off more material to try to maintain that sharpness. So we're gonna backtrack, we're gonna reset the bevel a little bit and take some material off. So I've got my coarsest stone here, because I do want to remove some material here. So you can see that I'm maintaining an angle here, and I just want to talk about that real quick. That's going to be a little bit, overall, a little bit shallower, but I want that to be a nice thin edge here. So as opposed to my pocket knife or an outdoors blade, we've got a thinner edge here on the kitchen knife. And that's about 15 degrees typically is what you want to do. So I'm already starting to remove some material, and you can see how much wider that primary edge is on this side than it is on this side. And that's what we want, because that means that we've got a thinner edge or thinner cross section going down to the edge here. So I'm just going to work that, and as I'm doing this, I'm putting pressure with my left hand, and I'm holding this in tension with my right hand, and that's sort of just a push-pull type scenario, and making sure that you're maintaining that angle. Okay, so we've removed some material here. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side here. And again, if you're not confident yet with maintaining that angle with the multiple strokes, you can still do it like this, which is more controlled, or easier to control, I should say, and it's a more gradual process. So it's not going to be as quick to do, but it's still effective. All right, so this is an old knife, and it's not heat treated quite as hard as I do my kitchen knives today, and it's also I believe a 1095 and 15 and 20 blade, so it doesn't have the higher carbon content that my 5200 steel blades do today. And so this material is coming off pretty quickly, really. But this stone actually works really well too, so I'm really happy with how it's performing. Anyways, so we've thinned that down a significant amount, but I don't think I did it quite evenly. You do want to make sure that you're even on that. You want to make sure that you're even so that you've got a bevel that puts you right in the center of your blade here. And again, one way to look at that is the thickness of that primary bevel there. And if you look at that and then you look at this, you can see we need to take a little more off of this side. Okay, so we've thinned that down a little bit, and you can feel that, you can see it, even to some degree you can look down the edge with your eye and see that it's thinner, okay? But to this point we haven't actually really addressed the edge itself. We've just been thinning down that material and really kind of staying away from the actual edge. So we can go ahead and switch to our medium grit stone now and more or less repeat that process similar to the way we did on the first knife. And I will point out that this is food grade mineral oil, and so I can just wipe this off and go back to food prep. So how much pressure do I put on here? You know, really the answer is whatever you're comfortable with to a point. You don't want to be, you know, crushing this. But I am putting some significant pressure on there because I'm trying to take some material off at this stage of the game, all right? So as I continue forward, you know, on the finer grit stone, I'm not going to be putting as much pressure on the blade. But on these first and second stones here, I am trying to remove some material. A little bit of rock there, what's going on? Okay, so I've hit it with the medium grit a few times. I'm going to come back with some nice controlled, even passes to make sure that our angle is all happy and good to go. Got some, not sure what's going on here, not sure why that's, I wasn't seated in there all the way or something. It's not wanting to sit quite flat. That's kind of annoying, but whatever the angle my stone is at, I can adjust here and adjust the angle of the knife to the stone. It's no longer flat to the table, but oh well. All right, so we're down to a nice medium grit, and now we can start really addressing the actual edge. Could probably do a couple more passes on there actually. So yeah, on your high-end custom kitchen knives, what you're going to be dealing with typically is a nice high carbon steel like 52100 that I use. And they're going to be heat treated harder than, say, your outdoors blade, because the application that they're being used for is not like a heavy, not used for chopping or like, real rough applications. And so that's going to give you some great edge retention. And since it's carbon steel, the ones that are carbon steel, like the ones that I make, it's still going to be easy to sharpen. You're still going to be able to actually take it to the stone and remove material in a reasonable, with reasonable effort. And they'll sharpen to a nice keen edge. A properly heat-treated high carbon steel blade is gonna sharpen to a nice keen edge that most stainless steels are not capable of, simply because of the composition of the steel. All right, so we've worked this down. I didn't quite get the heel worked down as much. I think we're about there now, though. So now I can go ahead and switch to my fine stone here, and we can really start addressing the edge. So I was at more of a shallow angle, taking that material off to bring that primary bevel further up, but I don't have to be quite that angle now, and I can go ahead and just address the very edge of our knife at a slightly higher angle. So I'm going to try to show that. I don't know if you can see that on camera, but we should be able to see a bright line at the primary bevel there, right down by the edge. And that is our fine stone, and that's hard to see, but it's there. So just the tiny hair's width down there at the edge is what is actually being addressed with this fine grit stone. And again, as you work your way up through the grits, the nice thing is that you don't have to spend an inordinate amount of time on each grit, because each grit is doing its job. And it's not like you're trying to start from square one with a super fine stone. That would just be silly. So I'm going to go a few more passes on here and get this up to a nice working edge here. Again, there's multiple different ways to tell if the blade is sharp, but as you do this, you're going to sort of develop an ability to tell if it's sharp. And I'm using the finger method here. I'm using the thumbnail test here. Once you get to a certain point, you can see if it's going to actually slice that paper for you. And, my personal typical employment is the shave test, which you don't have to do that. Some people don't like that, but it's not quite shaving sharp yet. It'll cut paper just fine, but it doesn't really want to shave, not like I like it to. So I can do a few more passes, get some more oil on that. I can do a few more passes on the Arkansas stone right here, and then I can leave it just like that, and I can go cut vegetables. I can slice up some onions, some peppers. That's what I did last night. Cut up some beef. It'll do that just fine. But just for fun, I think I'm going to go ahead and strop this out. Try to save that oil there. So yeah, that's an okay edge. Honestly, if I was going to leave it without stropping, I would really prefer to have a higher grit stone here, but I don't have that in this system. I could go to my finer Arkansas stone here, and that would be helpful. But I am just going to go ahead and finish out on this one with the strop. So I am pressing pretty hard on this, you know, not excessively, but you do want to be able to polish that edge, and I can see it, a nice bright line right down at the edge there. So this is going to be very sharp. Okay, so I can check it. And this is just a matter of experience. You're going to start feeling what a sharp knife feels like. Just go slow. It's really, you can't really tell somebody without having them feel it, but you can very carefully slide your fingers on there and feel. Now there's really not the micro teeth. It feels smooth, but if you put any pressure, you're going to be able to cut yourself real easy. Still catches the fingernail, but it slides this way pretty easily. And if we carefully come over here to the hair test, it just takes it off with very, very little pressure. And of course, it takes paper apart with almost no effort whatsoever. So this is sharp. It'll still cut nicely in the kitchen, even without those micro teeth. All right, guys, well, this video was a little slower pace than what I typically do, but my goal was to make it feel like you're in the shop here and I'm actually showing you how to make your knife sharp and ready to use. So hopefully we accomplished that here today, and you can take this lesson and apply these skills with minimal difficulty as you start to practice these, and end up with some sharp, ready to use knives. As always, appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you on the next video.